Girl, good to see you. How have you been today? How's your Sunday been? Nice. I should have gotten more sleep than I did. I was way too late trying to get an achievement for an item. I finished that oh, don't worry, I did go to sleep, but then I woke up early and managed to get the achievement about 15 minutes ago, and now I have this really cute little Santa Claus Matryoshka pet in RuneScape, so that was fun. I hope you've been sleeping well. Hey, Maestro, what's up? Hey, cutie pants, over here. Nah, he's just gonna settle onto the bed, I guess. Listen to the stories there. Wow. that is a late time to go to bed. Hey, Kickin', good to see you. How are you? Have you been streaming lately, Kickin'? I keep forgetting to ask. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, I'll have to remember later today to post up the February schedule, and we're going to go back onto a consistent schedule as opposed to these 2 weeks I do these days, and these 2 weeks I do these days. I'm doing all right. I mean, aside from lack of sleep, because I was playing RuneScape and, doing the skill grind, which is the only thing that I'm not really wild about with RuneScape. There's a lot of skill grinding, but I got this really cute pet from it. But also, I almost forgot, in Tuesday, ooh, nice. I hope that I will be around when you're streaming, because I do have work tomorrow, but I'll keep an eye out. But in February will be the return of all ages Storytime, so I have a couple of kids' books I'll put up a poll on Discord and on Twitter, so you can vote for which kids' book you want me to do. That's true, yeah. Every RPG is not an RPG without grinding. Either that or, it's either grinding or you put in a lot of real world money. I'm trying to get to a point where I can purchase like the membership, the month membership with in-game currency, because that's something that they added not long after I stopped playing 7 years ago. Sadly, I can't do Cat in the Hat. No, Dr. Seuss is too young for that. There are hardly any picture storybooks, actually, that are public domain. I know that the Velveteen Rabbit is, I think. Wait, I'll have to double check on that. But My Father's Dragon, I think, is. Those are kind of middling because there's a lot of words, but there's a lot of pictures. But the, what is it? The Little Engine That Could. That is public domain. But it would be too short for story time. But let's see. I know I've got Secret Garden and Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Those will go hand in hand. Oh, that's right. You said that you were going to start learning Unity. Oh, yeah, slow PC. I struggled with a slow PC until was almost a year ago when I got this new beauty, my Rainbow Disco computer. I know, not wanting to work. Although, any book is, my mindset for work. Don't sell yourself short. You're just low on blood. You need to go find some hapless victim and just sup a little and supply your brain with some think juice. That was weird. All right. Hang on a second. Okay. I was just checking something on Discord. Like, there's been a message. It was just somebody saying, hey, I'm starting my stream. I'm like, well, I'm starting my stream, so I'm not going to watch you. Which, by the way, Jacob from the Discord and from chat, he started streaming today, it looks like. I think I was his first follower. Yeah. I was laptop only for many, many, many years, but then it became apparent that desktops are easier to repair than laptops, and if a component like the keyboard or the screen stops working, you can go out and get a new one and all that stuff. So I'm like, okay, I'll get the desktop. It's just not nearly as mobile, but it works a lot better than my my laptop. Although I do love that you can, like, take your laptop to a cafe. Well, you can't take it to a cafe right now. After COVID, you can take your laptop to a cafe and, like, play some games or write or something like that, which I used to do. Yeah. Nice. I like gaming on PCs. I've only had one console ever, and it was the gray brick, the original Nintendo thing. And I had 2 games for it. The 2 games, Super Mario Brothers, the original, and Duck Hunt. Very, very true. I think I am going to go ahead and get started with the story time. So, last stream, my word, the amount of peer pressure that she was faced with, it was crazy. Ah, yes. I forgot about my my Game Boy. I actually got myself about 10 years ago a Game Boy for Christmas, Game Boy Color, because I had always wanted one, and I found one on eBay, and I bought a whole bunch of games, and by a whole bunch I mean like 4. So, I got all the important early Pokemon ones, and I got a couple of Zeldas. I haven't played it in a while. It's sitting right there. I know exactly where it is, but then I had my lovely gaming PC, and it's like, but I could game on my PC. So, yeah. One day I will return to my Game Boy Color. But yeah, those are my only 2 consoles ever. Alright, so the last story time we had Catherine facing a whole heap of peer pressure, and oh my gosh, I was pretty amazed that she was like, no, you know what? I know that what you're telling me to do is not right. I'm not doing it. Emulators are fun. I actually played quite a bit on emulators. That's how I played the original Zelda game. And a bit of Pokemon, but you can't really, do the whole trading with an emulator. Not that I could trade on my Game Boy anyways, because nobody else has a Game Boy. Oh, yes. Sorry. Thank you. Oh, my gosh. There we go. So we've got Maestro up. Thank you so much, Corel. You're awesome. All right. Yeah, and I have to remember to make Maestro disappear when I start doing when I start reading. The real maestro, by the way, over on my bed somewhere, hunkered down. All right, we're almost halfway. Here we go. Chapter 14. The next morning was fair, and Catherine almost expected another attack from the assembled party. With Mr. Allen to support her, she felt no dread of the event, but she would gladly be spared a contest where victory itself was painful, and most heartily rejoiced, therefore, at neither seeing nor hearing anything from them. The Tinleys called for her at the appointed time, and no new difficulty arising, no sudden recollection, no unexpected summons, no impertinent intrusion to disconcert their measures, my heroine was most unnaturally able to fulfill her engagement, though it was made with the hero himself. They determined on walking round Beechen Cliff, that noble hill whose beautiful verdure and hanging coppice render it so striking an object from almost every opening in Bath. "I never look at it," said Catherine as they walked along the side of the river without thinking of the south of France. "You have been abroad, then?" said Henry, a little surprised. Oh, no, I only mean that I have read about. What I have read about. It always puts me in mind of the country that Emily and her father traveled through in the mysteries of Udolpho. But you never read novels, I dare say." "Why not?" "Because they are not clever enough for you. Gentlemen read better books." "The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel, must be intolerably stupid. I have read all of Mrs. Radcliffe's works, and most of them with great pleasure. The Mysteries of Udolpho, when I had once begun it, I could not lay down again. I remember finishing it in 2 days, my hair standing on end the whole time." "Yes," added Miss Tinley, "and I remember that you undertook to read it aloud to me, and that when I was called away for only 5 minutes to answer a note, instead of waiting for me, you took the volume to the Hermitage Walk, and I was obliged to stay till you had finished it." "Thank you, Eleanor, a most honorable testimony. You see, Miss Morland, the injustice of your suspicions. Here was I, in my eagerness to get on, refusing to wait only 5 minutes for my sister, breaking the promise I had made of reading it aloud, and keeping her in suspense at a most interesting part by running away with the volume, which, you are to observe, was her own, particularly her own. I'm proud when I reflect on it, and I think it must establish me in your good opinion." "I'm very glad to hear it indeed, and now I shall never be ashamed of liking Udolpho myself. But I really thought before, young men despise novels amazingly." "It is amazingly. It may well suggest amazement if they do, for they read nearly as many as women. I myself have read hundreds and hundreds. Do not imagine that you can cope with me in a knowledge of Julias and Louisas. If we proceed to particulars, and engage in the never-ceasing inquiry, have you read this and have you read that, I shall soon leave you as far behind me as, what shall I say? I want an appropriate simile, as far as your friend Emily herself left poor Valancourt when she went with her aunt into Italy. Consider how many years I have had the start of you. I had entered on my studies at Oxford, while you were a good little girl working your sampler at home. Sampler, by the way, is just a little exercise of embroidery of all kinds. What are you doing back there, Maestro? Sorry about that. Not very good, I'm afraid, but not really. Do not you think Udolpho the nicest book in the world? The nicest, by which I suppose you mean the neatest. That must depend upon the binding. Henry, said Miss Tinley, you are very impertinent. Miss Morland, he is treating you exactly as he does his sister. He is forever finding fault with me for some incorrectness of language, and now he is taking the same liberty with you. The word nicest as you used it did not suit him, and you had better change it as soon as you can, or we shall be overpowered with Johnson and Blair all the rest of the way. I'm sure, cried Catherine, I did not mean to say anything wrong, but it is a nice book, and why should I not call it so?" "Very true," said Henry. "And this is a very nice day, and we are taking a very nice walk, and you are two very nice young ladies. Oh, it is a very nice word indeed. It does for everything. Originally, perhaps it was applied only to express neatness, propriety, delicacy, or refinement. People were nice in their dress, in their sentiments, or their choice. But now every commendation on every subject is comprised in that one word." "Well, in fact," cried his sister, "it ought only to be applied to you without any commendation at all. You are more nice than wise. Come, Miss Moreland, let us leave him to meditate over our faults in the utmost propriety of diction, while we praise Udolpho in whatever terms we like best. It is a most interesting work. You are fond of that kind of reading?" "To say the truth, I do not much like any other." "Indeed?" "It is. That is, I can read poetry and plays and things of that sort, and do not dislike travels, but history, real solemn history, I cannot be interested in. Can you?" "Yes, I am fond of history." "I wish I were too. I read a little as a duty, but it tells me nothing that does not either vex or weary me. The quarrels of popes and kings, with wars or pestilences, in every page. The men all so good for nothing, and hardly any women at all. It is very tiresome. And yet I often think it odd that it should be so dull, for a great deal of it must be invention. The speeches that are put into the heroes' mouths, their thoughts and designs. The chief of all this must be invention, and invention is what delights me in other books." "Historians, you think," said Miss Tinley, "are not happy in their flights of fancy. They display imagination without raising interest. I'm fond of history, and am very well contented to take the false with the true. In the principal facts, they have sources of intelligence in former histories and records, which may or maybe as much depend on." Oh, nice. That's awesome, Kickin'. Sorry about that. Which may be as much depended on, I conclude, as anything that does not actually pass under one's own observation. And as for the little embellishments you speak of, they are embellishments, and I like them as such. If a speech be well drawn up, I read it with pleasure, by whomsoever it may be made, and probably with much greater if the production of Mr. Hume or Mr. Robertson than if the genuine words of Caractacus, Agricola, or Alfred the Great. You are fond of history, and so are Mr. Allen and my father, and I have 2 brothers who do not dislike it. So many instances within my small circle of friends is remarkable. At this rate, I should not pity the writer of history any longer. If people like to read their books, it is all very well, but to be at so much trouble in filling great volumes, which, as I used to think, nobody would willingly ever look into, to be laboring only for the torment of little boys and girls, always struck me as a hard fate. Though I know it is all very right and necessary, I've often wondered if the person's courage that could sit down on purpose to do it. That little boys and girls should be tormented, said Henry, is what no one at all acquainted with human nature in a civilized state can deny. But, in behalf of our most distinguished historians, I must observe that they might well be offended at being supposed to have no higher aim, and that by their methods and styles they are perfectly well qualified to torment readers of the most advanced reason and mature time of life. I use the verb to torment as I observe to be your own method instead of to instruct, supposing them to be now admitted as synonymous. You think me foolish to call instruction a torment, but if you had been as much used as myself to hear poor little children first learning their letters and then learning to spell. If you had ever seen how stupid they can be for a whole morning together, and how tired my poor mother is at the end of it, as I am in the habit of seeing almost every day of my life at home, you would allow that to torment and to instruct might sometimes be used as synonymous words. Very probably, but historians are not accountable for the difficulty of learning to read, and even you yourself, who did not altogether seem particularly friendly to very severe, very intense application, may perhaps be brought to acknowledge that it is very well worthwhile to be tormented for 2 or 3 years of one's life, for the sake of being able to read all the rest of it. Consider, if reading had not been taught, Mrs. Radcliffe would have written in vain, or perhaps might not have written at all. Catherine assented, and a very warm panegyric from her. That's an interesting word. Yeah, I think it is panegyric from her on that lady's merits closed the subject. From her on that. Yeah, okay. Wow, that was weirdly constructed. The Tinleys were soon engaged in another on which she had nothing to say. They were viewing the country with the eyes of persons accustomed to drawing, and decided on its capability of being formed into pictures with all the eagerness of real taste. Here Catherine was quite lost. She knew nothing of drawing, nothing of taste, and she listened to them with an attention which brought her little profit, for they talked in phrases which conveyed scarcely any idea to her. The little which she could understand, however, appeared to contradict the very few notions she had entertained on the matter before. It seemed as if a good view were no longer to be taken from the top of a high hill, and that a clear blue sky was no longer a proof of a fine day. She was hardly ashamed of her ignorance, a misplaced shame. Where people wish to attach, they should always be ignorant. To come with a well-informed mind is to come with an inability of administering to the vanity of others, which a sensible person would always wish to avoid. A woman especially, if she have the misfortune of knowing anything, should conceal it as well as she can. The advantages of natural folly in a beautiful girl have been already set forth by the capital pen of a sister author, and to her treatment of the subject I will only add, in justice to men, that though to the larger and more trifling part of the sex, imbecility in females is a great enhancement of their personal charms, there is a portion of them too reasonable and too well informed themselves to desire anything more in women than ignorance. But Catherine did not know her own advantages, did not know that a good-looking girl with an affectionate heart and a very ignorant mind could not fail at attracting a clever young man, unless circumstances are particularly untoward. In the present instance, she confessed and lamented her want of knowledge, declared that she would give anything in the world to be able to draw, and a lecture on the picturesque immediately followed, in which the instructions were so clear that she soon began to see beauty in everything admired by him, and her attention was so earnest that he became perfectly satisfied of her having a great deal of natural taste. He talked of foregrounds, distances and second distances, side screens and perspectives, lights and shades, and Catherine was so hopeful a scholar that when they gained the top of Beechen Cliff, she voluntarily reflected the whole city of Bath was unworthy to make part of a landscape. Delighted with her progress, and fearful of wearying her with too much wisdom at once, Henry suffered the subject to decline, and by an easy transition from a piece of rocky fragment in the withered oak which he had placed near its summit, to oaks in general, to forests, the enclosure of them, wastelands, crown lands, and government, he shortly found himself arrived at politics, and from politics it was an easy step to silence. The general pause which succeeded his short disquisition on the state of the nation was put an end to by Catherine, who, in rather a solemn tone of voice, uttered these words: "I've heard that something very shocking indeed will soon come out in London." Miss Tinley, to whom this was chiefly addressed, was startled and hastily replied, "Indeed, of what nature?" "That I do not know, nor who is the author. I have only heard that it is to be more horrible than anything we have met with yet." "Good heavens! Where could you hear of such a thing?" "A particular friend of mine had an account of it in a letter from London yesterday. It is to be uncommonly dreadful. I shall expect murder and everything of the kind." "You speak with astonishing composure. But I hope your friend's accounts have been exaggerated, and if such a design is is known beforehand, proper measures will undoubtedly be taken by government to prevent its coming to effect." "Government," said Henry, endeavoring not to smile, "neither desires nor dares to interfere in such matters. There must be murder, and government cares not how much." The ladies stared. He laughed and added, "Come, shall I make you understand each other, or leave you to puzzle out an explanation as you can? No, I will be noble. I will prove myself a man no less by the generosity of my soul than the clearness of my mind. I have no patience with such of my sex I have no patience with such of my sex as disdain to let themselves sometimes down to the comprehension of yours. Perhaps the abilities of women are neither sound nor acute, neither vigorous nor keen. Perhaps they may want observation, discernment, judgment, fire, genius, and wit. Miss Morland, do not mind what he says, but have the goodness to satisfy me as to this dreadful riot." "Riot? What riot?" "My dear Eleanor, the riot is only in your own brain. The confusion there is scandalous. Miss Morland has been talking of nothing more dreadful than a few publications, which is shortly to come out in 3 duodecimo volumes, 276 pages in each, with a frontispiece to the first, or 2 tombstones and a lantern. Do you understand? And you, Miss Morland, my stupid sister, has mistaken all your clearest expressions. You talked of expected horrors in London, and instead of instantly conceiving, as any rational creature would have done, that such words could relate only to a circulating library, she immediately pictured to herself a mob of 3,000 men assembled in St. George's Fields, the Bank attacked, the Tower threatened, the streets of London flowing with blood, a detachment of the 12th Light Dragoons, the hopes of the nation, called up from Northampton to quell the insurgents, and the gallant Captain Frederick Tilney. Hang on a second. Have I been reading their name wrong this whole time? Oh my gosh! For years I have been calling them Tinley, and their name is Tilney. Okay, I'm sorry. That was, okay. Where was I? "And the gallant Captain Frederick Tilney, in the moment of charging at the head of his troop, knocked off his horse by a brickbat from an upper window. Forgive her stupidity. The fears of the sister have added to the weakness of the women, but she is by no means a simpleton in general." Catherine looked grave. "And now, Henry," said Miss Tilney, "that you have made us understand each other, you may as well make Miss Morland understand herself, unless you mean to have her think you intolerably rude to your sister, and a great brute to your opinion of women in general. Miss Morland is not used to your odd ways." "I shall be most happy to make her better acquainted with them." "No doubt, but that is no explanation of the present." "What am I to do?" "You know what you ought to do. Clear your character handsomely before her. Tell her that you think very highly of the understanding of women." "Miss Morland, I think very highly of the understanding of all the women in the world, and especially those, whoever they may be, with whom I happen to be in company." "That's not enough. Be more serious." "Miss Morland, no one can think more highly of the understanding of women than I do. In my opinion, nature has given them so much that they never find it necessary to use more than half." "We shall get nothing more serious from him now, Miss Morland. He is not in a sober mood, but I do assure you that he must be entirely misunderstood if he can ever appear to say an unjust thing of any women at all, or an unkind one of me." It was no effort to Catherine to believe that Henry Tilney would never be wrong. His manner might sometimes surprise, but his meaning must always be just, and what she did not understand, she was almost as ready to admire as what she did. The whole walk was delightful, and though it ended too soon, its conclusion was delightful too. Her friends attended her into the house, and Miss Tilney, before they parted, addressed herself with respectful form, as much to Mrs. Allen as to Catherine, petitioned for the pleasure of her company to dinner on the day after the next. No difficulty was made on Mrs. Allen's side, and the only difficulty on Catherine's was in concealing the excess of her pleasure. The morning had passed away so charmingly as to banish all her friendship and natural affection, for no thought of Isabella or James had crossed her mind during their walk. When the Tilneys were gone, she became amiable again, but she was amiable for some time to little effect. Mrs. Allen had no intelligence to give that could relieve her anxiety. She had heard nothing of any of them. Towards the end of the morning, however, Catherine, having occasion for some indispensable yard of ribbons, which must be brought without a moment's delay, walked out into the town, and in Bond Street overtook the second Miss Thorpe, as she was loitering towards Edgar's building between two of the sweetest girls in the world, who had been her dear friends all the morning. From her she soon learned that the party to Clifton had taken place. "They set off at 8 this morning," said Miss Anne, "and I am sure I do not envy them their drive. I think you and I are very well off to be out of this scrape. It must be the dullest thing in the world, for there is not a soul at Clifton at this time of year. Belle went with your brother, and John drove Maria." Catherine spoke the pleasure she really felt on hearing this part of the arrangement. "Oh, yes," rejoiced the other. "Maria's gone. She was quite wild to go. She thought it would be something very fine. I cannot say I admire her taste, and for my part, I was determined from the first not to go. They pressed me ever so much." Catherine, a little doubtful of this, could not help answering, "I wish you could have gone too. It is a pity you could not all go." "Thank you, but it is quite a matter of indifference to me. Indeed, I would not have gone on any account. I was saying so to Emily and Sophia when you overtook us." Catherine was still unconvinced, but glad that Anne should have the friendship of an Emily and a Sophia to console her. She bade her adieu without much uneasiness, and returned home pleased that the party had not been prevented by her refusing to join it, and very heartily wishing that it might be too pleasant to allow either James or Isabella to resent her resistance any longer. I can't believe I've been saying their name wrong for, it hasn't been too many years, but still it's been quite a few years. But one of the reasons for that is because I know a Tinley. So, yeah. Chapter 15. Early the next day, a note from Isabella, speaking peace and tenderness in every line, and entreating the immediate presence of her friend on a matter of the utmost importance, hastened Catherine, in the happiest state of confidence and curiosity, to Edgar's buildings. The two youngest Miss Thorpes were by themselves in the parlor, and, on Anne's quitting it to call her sister, Catherine took the opportunity of asking the other for some particulars of their yesterday's party. Maria desired no greater pleasure than to speak of it, and Catherine immediately learned that it had been altogether the most delightful scheme in the world, that nobody could imagine how charming it had been, and that it had been more delightful than anybody could conceive. Such was the information of the first 5 minutes. The second unfolded thus much in detail: that they had driven directly to the York Hotel, ate some soup and a bespoken early dinner, walked down to the pump room, tasted the water, and laid out some shillings in purses and spars, then joined to eat ice at a pastry cook's, and hurrying back to the hotel, swallowed their dinner in haste to prevent being in the dark, and then had a delightful drive back, only the moon was not up, and it rained a little, and Mr. Moreland's horse was so tired he could hardly get it along. Catherine listened with heartfelt satisfaction. It appeared the Blaise Castle had never been thought of, and, as for all the rest, there was nothing to regret for half an instant. Maria's intelligence concluded with a tender effusion of pity for her sister Anne, whom she represented as insupportably cross from being excluded the party. She will never forget me, I am sure, but you know, how could I help it? John would have me go, for he vowed he would not. John would have me go, for he vowed he would not drive her because she had such thick ankles. I dare say she will not be in a good humor again this month, but I am determined I will not be cross. It is not a little matter that puts me out of temper. Isabella now entered the room with so eager a step and a look of such happy importance as engaged all her friends' notice. Maria was without ceremony sent away, and Isabella, embracing Catherine, thus began. Yes, my dear Catherine, it is so indeed. Your penetration has not deceived you. Oh, that arch of your eye, it sees through everything. Catherine replied only by a look of wondering ignorance. Nay, my beloved, sweetest friend, continued the other, compose yourself. I am amazingly agitated, as you perceive. Let us sit down and talk in comfort. Well, and so you guessed it the moment you had my note? Sly creature! Oh, and my dear Catherine, you alone, who know my heart, can judge of my present happiness. Your brother is the most charming of men. I only wish I were more worthy of him. But what will your excellent father and mother say? Heavens! When I think of them, I am so agitated. Catherine's understanding began to awake. An idea of the truth suddenly darted into her mind, and with the natural blush of so new an emotion, she cried out, Good heavens! My dear Isabella, what do you mean? Can you really be in love with James? This bold surmise, however, she soon learnt to comprehend about half the fact. The anxious affection, which she was accused of having continually watched in Isabella's every look and action, had, in the course of their yesterday's party, received the delightful confession of an equal love. Her heart and faith were alike engaged to James. Never had Catherine listened to anything so full of interest, wonder, and joy. Her brother and her friend engaged. New to such circumstances, the importance of it appeared unspeakably great, and she contemplated it as one of those grand events of which the ordinary course of life can hardly afford a return. The strength of her feelings she could not express. The nature of them, however, contented her friend. The happiness of having such a sister was their first effusion, and the fair ladies mingled in embraces and tears of joy. Delighting, however, as Catherine sincerely did in the prospect of the connection, it must be acknowledged that Isabella far surpassed her in tender anticipations. You will be so infinitely dearer to me, my Catherine, than either Anne or Marie. I feel that I shall be so much more attached to my dear Moreland's family than to my own. This was a pitch of friendship beyond Catherine. You are so like your dear brother, continued Isabella, that I quite doted on you from the first moment I saw you. But so it always is with me. The first moment settles everything. The very first day that Moreland came to us last Christmas, the very first moment I beheld him, oh, my heart was irrevocably gone. I remember I wore my yellow gown with my hair done up in braids, and when I came into the drawing-room and John introduced him, I thought I never saw anybody so handsome before. Here Catherine secretly acknowledged the power of love, for, though exceedingly fond of her brother and partial to all his endowments, She had never in her life thought of him handsome. I remember, too, Miss Andrews drank tea with us that evening and wore her puce-colored sarcenet, and she looked so heavenly that I thought your brother must certainly fall in love with her. I could not sleep a wink at night for thinking of it. Oh, Catherine, the many sleepless nights I have had on your brother's account! I would not have you suffer half what I have done. I am grown wretchedly thin, I know, but I will not pain you by describing my anxiety. You have seen enough of it. I feel that I have betrayed myself perpetually, so unguarded in speaking of my partiality for the church. But my secret I was always sure would be safe with you. Catherine felt that nothing could have been safer, but, ashamed of an ignorance little expected, she dared no longer contest the point, nor refuse to have been as full of arch penetration and affectionate sympathy as Isabella chose to consider her. Her brother, she found, was preparing to set off with all speed to Fullerton to make known his situation and ask consent. And here was a source of some real agitation to the mind of Isabella. Catherine endeavored to persuade her, as she was herself persuaded, that her father and mother would never oppose their son's wishes. "It is impossible," said she, "for parents to be more kind or more desirous of their children's happiness. I have no doubt of their consenting immediately." "Morland says exactly the same thing," replied Isabella. "And yet I dare not expect it. My fortune will be so small. They never can consent to it. Your brother who might marry anybody." Here Catherine again discerned the force of love. "Indeed, Isabella, you are too humble. The difference of fortune can be nothing to signify." "Oh, my sweet Catherine, in your generous heart, I know it would signify nothing, but we must not expect just such disinterestedness in many. As for myself, I am sure I only wish your situations were reversed. Had I the command of millions, were I mistress of the whole world, your brother would be my only choice." This charming sentiment, recommended as much by sense as novelty, gave Catherine a most pleasing remembrance of all the heroines of her acquaintance, and she thought her friend never looked more lovely than in uttering the grand idea. "I am sure they will consent," was her frequent declaration. "I am sure they will be delighted with you." "For my part," said Isabella, "my wishes are so moderate that the smallest income in nature would be enough for me. Where people are really attached, poverty itself is wealth. Grandeur I detest. I would not settle in London for the universe. A cottage in some retired village would be ecstasy. There are some charming little villas about Richmond." "Richmond?" cried Catherine. "You must settle near Fullerton. You must be near us." "I'm sure I shall be miserable if we do not. If I can be but near you, I shall be satisfied. But this is idle talking. I will not allow myself to think of such things till we have our father's answer." "Your father's answer. Morland says that by sending it tonight to Salisbury, we may have it tomorrow." "Tomorrow! Oh, I know I shall never have courage to open the letter. I know it will be the death of me." A reverie succeeded this conviction, and when Isabella spoke again, it was to resolve on the quality of her wedding gown. Their conference was put an end to by the anxious young lover himself, who came to breathe his parting sigh before he set off for Wiltshire. Catherine wished to congratulate him, but knew not what to say, and her eloquence was only in her eyes. From them, however, the 8 parts of speech shone out most expressively, and James could combine them with ease. Impatient for the realization of all that he hoped at home, his adieus were not long, and they would have been yet shorter, had it not been frequently detained by the urgent entreaties of his fair one that he would go. Twice was he called almost from the door by her eagerness to have him gone. "Indeed, Morland, I must drive you away. Consider how far you have to ride. I cannot bear to see you linger so. For heaven's sake, waste no more time. There, go, go, I insist on it." The two friends, with hearts now more united than ever, were inseparable for the day, and in schemes of sisterly happiness the hours flew along. Mrs. Thorpe and her son, who were acquainted with everything, and who seemed only to want Mr. Morland's consent to consider Isabella's engagement as the most fortunate circumstance imaginable for their family, were allowed to join their councils, and add their quota of significant looks and mysterious expressions to follow up the measure of curiosity to be raised at the unprivileged younger sisters. To Catherine's simple feelings, this odd sort of reverse seemed rather kindly meant, neither kindly meant nor consistently supported, and its unkindness she would hardly have forborne pointing out, had its inconsistency been less than friend. But Anne and Maria soon set their hearts at ease by the sagacity of their I-know-what, and the evening was spent in a sort of war of wit, a display of family ingenuity on one side in the mystery of an affected secret, on the other of undefined discovery, all equally acute. Catherine was with her friend again the next day, endeavoring to support her spirits and while away the many tedious hours before the delivery of the letters, a needful exertion, for as the time of the reasonable expectation drew near, Isabella became more and more desponding, and before the letter arrived had worked herself into a state of real distress. But when it did come, where could distress be found? I have had no difficulty in gaining the consent of my kind parents, and am promised that everything in their power shall be done to forward my happiness, were the first 3 lines, and in one moment all was joyful security. The brightest glow was instantly spread over Isabella's features. All care and anxiety seemed removed. Her spirits became almost too high for control, and she called herself without scruple the happiest of mortals. Mrs. Thorpe, with tears of joy, embraced her daughter, her son, her visitor, and could have embraced half the inhabitants of Bath with satisfaction. Her heart was overflowing with tenderness. It was dear John and dear Catherine at every word. Dear Anne and dear Maria must immediately be made sharers in their felicity, and 2 dears at once before the name of Isabella were not more than that beloved child had now well earned. John himself was no skulker in joy. He not only bestowed on Mr. Morland the high commendation of being one of the finest fellows in the world, but swore off many sentences in his praise. The letter, whence sprang all this felicity, was short, containing little more than his assurance of success, and every particular was deferred till James could write again. But for particulars, Isabella could well afford to wait. The needful was comprised in Mr. Morland's promise. His honour was pledged to make everything easy, and by what means their income was to be formed, whether landed property were to be resigned, or funded money made over, was a matter in which her disinterested spirit took no concern. She knew enough to feel secure of an honourable and speedy establishment, and her imagination took a rapid flight over its attendant felicities. She saw herself at the end of a few weeks the gaze and admiration of every new acquaintance at Fullerton, the envy of every valued old friend at Putney, with a carriage at her command, a new name on her tickets, and a brilliant exhibition of hoop rings on her fingers. When the contents of the letter was ascertained, John Thorpe, who had only waited its arrival to begin its journey to London, prepared to set off. "Well, Miss Morland," said he, on finding her alone in the parlour, "I'm come to bid you good-bye." Catherine wished him a good journey. Without appearing to hear her, he walked to the window, fidgeted about, hummed a tune, and seemed wholly self-occupied. "Shall not you be late at Device's?" said Catherine. He made no answer, but after a minute's silence burst out with, "A famous good thing, this marrying scheme, upon my soul. Clever fancy of Moreland's and Bell's. What do you think of it, Miss Moreland? I say it's good. It is no bad notion." "I'm sure I think it a very good one." "Do you? That's honest, by heavens. I'm glad you are no enemy of matrimony, however. Did you ever hear the old song, 'Going to one wedding brings on another'? I say you will come to Bell's wedding, I hope." "Yes, I have promised your sister to be with her, if possible." "And then, twisting himself about and forcing a foolish laugh, "I say, then, we may try the truth of this same old song." "May we? But I never sing." "Well, I wish you good journey. I dine with Miss Tilney today, and must now be going home." "Nay, but there is no such confounded hurry. Who knows when we may be together again?" "Not but that I shall be down, hang on a second. Not that I shall be down again by the end of the fortnight, and a devilish long fortnight it will appear to me." "And why do you stay away so long?" replied Catherine, finding that he waited for an answer. "Oh, that is kind of you, however, kind and good-natured. I shall not forget it in a hurry. But you have more good nature and all that than anybody living, I believe. A monstrous deal of good nature, and it is not only good nature, but you have so much of everything, and then you have such, upon my soul, I do not know anybody like you." "Oh, dear, there are a great many people like me, I dare say, only a great deal better. Good morning to you. But I say, Miss Moreland, I shall come and pay my respects at Fullerton before it is long, if not disagreeable." "Pray do. My father and mother will be very glad to see you." "And I hope, Miss Moreland, you will not be sorry to see me." "Oh, dear, not at all. There are very few people I am sorry to see. Company is always cheerful." "That is just my way of thinking. Give me but a little cheerful company. Let me only have the company of the people I love. Let me only be where I like, and with whom I like, and the devil take the rest, say I. And I am heartily glad to hear you say the same. But I have a notion, Miss Moreland, you and I think pretty much alike upon most matters." "Yeah, right." "Perhaps we may, but it is more than I ever thought of. And as to most matters, to say the truth, there are not many that I know my own mind about." "By Jove, no more do I. It is not my way to bother my brains with what does not concern me. My notion of things is simple enough. Let me only have the girl I like, say I, with a comfortable house over my head, and what care I for all the rest? Fortune is nothing. I am sure of a good income of my own, and if she had not a penny, why, so much the better." "Very true. I think like you there. If there is a good fortune on one side, there can be no occasion for any on the other, no matter which has it, so that there is enough. I hate the idea of one good fortune looking out for another, and to marry for money I think the wickedest thing in existence. Good day. We shall be very glad to see you at Fullerton whenever it is convenient." And away she went. It was not in the power of all his gallantry to detain her longer. With such news to communicate and such a visit to prepare for, her departure was not to be delayed by anything in this nature to urge, and she hurried away, leaving him to the undivided consciousness of his own happy address, and her explicit encouragement. The agitation which she had herself experienced on first learning her brother's engagement made her expect to raise no inconsiderable emotion in Mr. and Mrs. Allen by the communication of the wonderful event. How great was her disappointment! The important affair, which many words of preparation ushered in, had been foreseen by them both ever since her brother's arrival, and all that they felt on the occasion was comprehended in a wish for the young people's happiness, with a remark, and on the gentleman's side in favor of Isabella's beauty, and on the lady's of her great good luck. It was to Catherine the most surprising insensibility. The disclosure, however, of the great secret of James going to Fullerton the day before did raise some emotion in Mrs. Allen. She could not listen to that with perfect calmness, but repeatedly regretted the necessity of its concealment, wished she could have known his intention, wished she could have seen him before he went, as she should certainly have troubled him with her best regards to his father and mother, and her kind compliments to all the Skinners. Chapter 16. Catherine's expectations of pleasures from her visit in Milsom Street were so very high that disappointment was inevitable, and accordingly, though she was most politely received by General Tilney, and kindly welcomed by his daughter, though Henry was at home, and no one else of the party she found on her return, without spending many hours in the examination of her feelings, that she had gone to her appointment preparing for happiness which it had not afforded. Instead of finding herself improved in acquaintance with Miss Tilney from the intercourse of the day, she seemed hardly so intimate with her as before. Instead of seeing Henry Tilney to greater advantage than ever, and the ease of a family party, he had never said so little, nor been so little agreeable. And in spite of their father's great civilities to her, in spite of his thanks, invitation, and compliments, it had been a release to get away from him. It puzzled her to account for all this. It could not be General Tilney's fault. That was perfectly agreeable and good-natured, and altogether a very charming man. Did not admit of a doubt, for he was tall and handsome, and Henry's father. He could not be accountable for his children's want of spirits, or for her want of enjoyment in his company. The former she hoped at last might have been accidental, and the latter she could only attribute to her own stupidity. Isabella, on hearing the particulars of the visit, gave a different explanation. It was all pride, insufferable haughtiness and pride. She had long suspected the family to be very high, and this made it certain. Such insolence of behavior as Miss Tilney's she's never heard of in her life, not to do the honors of her house with good common breeding. To behave to her guests with such superciliousness, hardly even to speak to her. But it was not so bad as that, Isabella. There was no superciliousness. She was very civil. Oh, don't defend her. And then the brother, he who had appeared so attached to you. Good heavens! Well, some people's feelings are incomprehensible, and so he hardly looked once at you the whole day. I do not say so, but he did not seem in good spirits. How contemptible! Of all things in the world, inconsistency is my aversion. Let me entreat you never to think of him again, my dear Catherine. Instead, he is unworthy of you. Unworthy? I do not suppose he ever thinks of me. That is exactly what I say. He never thinks of you. Such fickleness. Oh, how different to your brother and to mine. I really believe John has the most constant heart. But as for General Tilney, I assure you it would be impossible for anybody to behave to me with greater civility and attention. It seemed to be his only care to entertain and make me happy. Oh, I know no harm of him. I do not suspect him of pride. I believe he is a very gentlemanlike man. John thinks very well of him, and John's judgment, well, I shall see how they behave to me this evening. We shall meet them at the rooms. Must I go? Do not you intend to? I thought it was all settled. Nay, since you make such a point of it, I can refuse you nothing. But do not insist upon my being very agreeable, for my heart, you know, will be some 40 miles off. And as for dancing, do not mention it, I beg. That is quite out of the question. Charles Hodges will plague me to death, I dare say, but I shall cut him very short. 10 to 1, but he guesses the reason, and that is exactly what I want to avoid, so I shall insist on his keeping his conjecture to himself. Isabella's opinion of the Tilneys did not influence her friend. She was sure there had been no insolence in the manners either of brother or sister, and she did not credit there being any pride in their hearts. The evening rewarded her confidence. She was met by one of the same kindness, and by the other with the same attention as heretofore. Miss Tilney took pains to be near her, and Henry asked her to dance. Having heard the day before in Milsom Street that their elder brother, Captain Tilney, was expected almost every hour, she was at no loss for the name of a very fashionable-looking, handsome young man, whom she had never seen before, and who now evidently belonged to their party. She looked at him with great admiration, and even supposed it possible that some people might think him handsomer than his brother, though, in her eyes, his air was more assuming, and his countenance less prepossessing. His taste and manners were beyond a doubt decidedly inferior, for within her hearing he not only protested against every thought of dancing himself, but even laughed openly at Henry for finding it possible. From the latter circumstance it may be presumed that, whatever might be our heroine's opinion of him, his admiration of her was not a very dangerous kind, not likely to produce animosities between the brothers, nor persecutions to the lady. He cannot be the instigator of the 3 villains in horsemen's greatcoats, by whom she will hereafter be forced into a travelling chaise and 4, which will drive off at incredible speeds. Catherine, meanwhile, undisturbed by presentiments of such an evil, or of any evil at all, except that of having but a short set to dance down, enjoyed her usual happiness with Henry Tilney, listening with sparkling eyes to everything he said, and, in finding him irresistible, becoming so herself. At the end of the first dance, Captain Tilney came towards them again, and, much to Catherine's dissatisfaction, pulled his brother away. They retired whispering together, and though her delicate sensibility did not take immediate alarm and lay it down as fact, the Captain Tilney must have heard some malevolent misrepresentation of her, which he now hastened to communicate to his brother, in hope of separating them forever. She could not have her partner conveyed from her sight without very uneasy sensations. Her suspense was of a full 5 minutes' duration, and she was beginning to think it a very long quarter of an hour when they both returned, and an explanation was given, by Henry requesting to know if she thought her friend Miss Thorpe would have any objection to dancing, as his brother would be most happy to be introduced to her. Catherine, without hesitation, replied that she was very sure Miss Thorpe did not mean to dance at all. The cruel reply was passed on to the other, and he immediately walked away. "Your brother will not mind it, I know," she said, "because I heard him say before that he hated dancing, but it was very good-natured in him to think of it. I suppose he saw Isabella sitting down, and fancied she might wish for a partner, but he is quite mistaken, for she would not dance upon any account in the world." Henry smiled and said, "How very little trouble it can give you to understand the motive of other people's actions." What do you mean?" "With you it is not. How is such a one likely to be influenced? What is the inducement most likely to act upon such a person's feeling, age, situation, and probable habits of life considered? But how should I be influenced? What would be my inducement in acting so and so?" "I do not understand you." "Then we are on unequal terms, for I understand you perfectly well." "Me? Yes, I cannot speak well enough to be unintelligible." "Bravo! An excellent satire on modern language." "But pray tell me what you mean." "Shall I indeed? Do you really desire it? But you are not aware of the consequences. It will involve you in a very cruel embarrassment, and certainly bring on a disagreement between us." No, it should not do either. I am not afraid." "Well, then, I only meant that your attributing my brother's wish of dancing with Miss Thorpe to be good nature alone convinced me of your being superior in good nature yourself to all the rest of the world." Catherine blushed and disclaimed, and the gentleman's predictions were verified. There was a something, however, in his words which repaid her for the pain of confusion, and that something occupied her mind so much that she drew back for some time, forgetting to speak or to listen, and almost forgetting where she was, till roused by the voice of Isabella, she looked up and saw her with Captain Tilney preparing to give them hands across. Isabella shrugged her shoulders and smiled, the only explanation of this extraordinary change which could at that time be given. But as it was not quite enough for Catherine's comprehension, she spoke her astonishment in very plain terms to her partner. "I cannot think how it could happen. Isabella was so determined not to dance." "And did Isabella never change her mind before?" "Oh, but because... And your brother, after what you told him from me, how could he think of going to ask her?" "I cannot take surprise to myself on that head. You bid me no surprise on your friend's account, and therefore I am. But as for my brother, his conduct in the business, I must own, has been no more than I believed him perfectly equal to. The fairness of your friend was an open attraction. Her firmness, you know, could only be understood by yourself." "You're laughing, but I assure you Isabella is very firm in general." "It is as much as should be said by anyone. To be always firm must be to be often obstinate. When properly to relax is the trial of judgment, and without reference to my brother, I really think Miss Thorpe has by no means chosen ill in fixing on the present hour." The friends were not able to get together for any confidential discourse till all the dancing was over, but then, as they walked about the room arm in arm, Isabella thus explained herself. "I do not wonder at your surprise, and I am really fatigued to death. He is such a rattle. Assuming enough, if my mind had been disengaged, that I would have given the world to sit still." "Then why did not you?" "Oh, my dear, I would have looked so particular, and you know how I abhor doing that. I refused him as long as I possibly could, but he would take no denial. You have no idea how he pressed me. I begged him to excuse me and get some other partner, but no, not he. After aspiring to my mind, there was nobody else in the room he could bear to think of, and it was not that he wanted merely to dance, he wanted to be with me." "Oh, such nonsense! I told him he had taken a very unlikely way to prevail upon me. For of all things in the world I hated fine speeches and compliments, and so then I found there would be no peace if I did not stand up. Besides, I thought Mrs. Hughes, who introduced him, might take it ill if I did not. And your dear brother, I am sure he would have been miserable if I had sat down the whole evening. I am so glad it is over. My spirits are quite jaded with listening to his nonsense, and then, being such a smart young fellow, I saw every eye was upon us." "He is very handsome indeed." "Handsome? Yes, I suppose he may. I dare say people would admire him in general, but he is not at all in my style of beauty. I hate a florid complexion and dark eyes in a man. However, he is very well, amazingly conceited, I am sure. I took him down several times, you know, in my way." When the young ladies next met, they had a far more interesting subject to discuss. James Morland's second letter was then received, and the kind intentions of his father fully explained. A living, of which Mr. Morland was himself patron and incumbent, of about £400 yearly value, was to be resigned to his son as soon as he would be old enough to take it. No trifling deduction from the family income, no niggardly assignment to one of 10 children. That's an unfortunate word. As estate of at least equal value, moreover, was assured as his future inheritance. James expressed himself on the occasion with becoming gratitude and the necessity of waiting between 2 and 3 years before they could marry, being, however, unwelcome, no more than he had expected, was borne to him without discontent. Catherine, whose expectations had been as unfixed as her ideas of her father's income, and whose judgment was now entirely led by her brother, felt equally well satisfied and heartily congratulated Isabella on having everything so pleasantly settled. "It is very charming indeed," said Isabella with a grave face. "Mr. Moreland has behaved vastly handsome indeed," said the gentle Mrs. Thorpe, looking anxiously at her daughter. "I only wish I could do as much. One could not expect more from him, you know. If he finds he can do more by and by, I dare say he will, for I am sure he must be an excellent good-hearted man. 400 is but a small income to begin on, indeed, but your wishes, my dear Isabella, are so moderate, you do not consider how little you ever want, my dear." "It is on my own account I wish far more, but I cannot bear to be the means of injuring my dear Moreland, making him sit down upon an income hardly enough to find one in the common necessities of life. For myself it is nothing. I never think of myself. I know you never do, my dear, and you will always find your reward in the affection it makes everybody feel for you. There never was a young woman so beloved as you are by everyone that knows you, and I dare say when Mr. Moreland sees you, my dear child. But do not let us distress our dear Catherine by talking of such things. Mr. Moreland has behaved so very handsome, you know. I always heard he was a most excellent man. And you know, my dear, we are not to suppose but what, if you had had a suitable fortune, he would have come down with something more, for I am sure he must be a most liberal-minded man." "Nobody can think better of Mr. Moreland than I do, I am sure. But everyone has their failing, you know, and everybody has a right to do what they like with their money." Catherine was hurt by this insinuation. "I am very sure," she said, "my father has promised to do as much as he can afford." Isabella recollected herself. "As to that, my sweet Catherine, there cannot be a doubt, and you know me well enough to be sure that a much smaller income would satisfy me. It is not the want of more money that makes me just at present a little out of spirits. I hate money, and if our union could take place upon only £50 a year, I should not have a wish unsatisfied. Oh, my Catherine, you have found me out. There's the sting, the long, endless 2 years and a half that are to pass before your brother can hold the living." Yes, my dear Isabella," said Mrs. Thorpe, "we perfectly see into your heart. You have no disguise. We perfectly understand the present vexation, and everybody must love you the better for such a noble, honest affection." Catherine's uncomfortable feelings began to lessen. She endeavored to believe that the delay of the marriage was the only source of Isabella's regret, and when she saw at their next interview, as cheerful and amiable as ever, endeavoring to forget that she had for a minute thought otherwise. James soon followed his letter, and was received with the most gratifying kindness. Chapter 17. The Allens had now entered on the 6th week of their stay in Bath, and whether it would... Goodness, they've only known each other a month. And whether it should be the last was for some time a question to which Catherine listened with a beating heart. To have her acquaintance with the Tilneys' end so soon was an evil which nothing could counterbalance. Her whole happiness seemed at stake, while the affair was in suspense, and everything secured when it was determined that the lodgings should be taken for another fortnight. What this additional fortnight was to produce to her beyond the pleasure of sometimes seeing Henry Tilney made but a small part of Catherine's speculation. Once or twice, indeed, since James's engagement had taught her what could be done, she had not so far as to indulge in a secret perhaps, but in general the felicity of being with him for the present bounded her views. The present was now comprised in another 3 weeks, and her happiness being certain for that period, The rest of her life was at such a distance as to entice but little interest. In the course of the morning which saw this business arranged, she visited Miss Tilney and poured forth her joyful feelings. It was doomed to be a day of trial. No sooner had Miss Tilney told her of her father's having just determined upon quitting Bath by the end of another week. Here was a blow. The past suspense of the morning had been ease and quiet to the present disappointment. Catherine's countenance fell, and in a voice of most sincere concern she echoed Miss Tilney's concluding words. By the end of another week. Yes, my father can seldom be persuaded upon to give the waters what I think a fair trial. He has been disappointed of some friend's arrival whom he expected to meet here, and as he is now pretty well, it is a hurry to get home. I am very sorry for it, said Catherine dejectedly. If I had known this before, perhaps, said Miss Tilney in an embarrassed manner, you would be so good. It would make me very happy if... The entrance of her friend put a stop to the civility which Catherine was beginning to hope might introduce a desire of their corresponding. After addressing her with this usual politeness, he turned to his daughter and said, Well, Eleanor, may I congratulate you on being successful in your application to your fair friend? I was just beginning to make the request, sir, as you came in. I will proceed by all means. I know how much your heart is in it. My daughter, Miss Morland, he continued, without leaving his daughter time to speak, has been forming a very bold wish. We leave Bath, as she has perhaps told you, on Saturday se'nnight. I don't know what that word is. It's SE'NNIGHT. A letter from my steward tells me that my presence is wanted at home, and it being disappointed in my hope of seeing the Marquis of Longtown and General Courtenay here, some of my very old friends, there is nothing to detain me longer in Bath, and could we carry our selfish point with you, we should leave it without a single regret. Can you, in short, be prevailed on to quit this scene of public triumph and oblige your friend Eleanor with your company in Gloucestershire? I am almost ashamed to make the request, though its presumption would certainly appear greater to every creature in Bath than yourself. Modesty such as yours, but not for the world would I paint it to by open praise. If you can be induced to honor us with a visit, you will make us happy beyond expression. 'Tis true, we can offer you nothing like the gaieties of this living place. We can tempt you neither by amusement nor splendor, for our mode of living, as you see, is plain and unpretending. Yet no endeavors shall be wanting on our side to make Northanger Abbey not wholly disagreeable. Northanger Abbey. These were thrilling words, and wound up Catherine's feelings to the highest point of ecstasy. Her grateful and gratified heart could hardly restrain its expression within the language of tolerable calmness. To receive so flattering an invitation, to have her company so warmly solicited, everything honorable and soothing, every present enjoyment, and every future hope was contained in it, and her acceptance, with only the saving clause of Papa and Mamma's approbation, was eagerly given. I will write home directly, she said, and if they do not object, as I dare say they will not, General Tilney was not less sanguine, having already waited on her excellent friends in Pulteney Street, and obtained their sanction of their wishes. Since they can consent to part with you, said he, we may expect philosophy from all the world. Miss Tilney was earnest, though gentle, in her second civilities, and the affair became in a few minutes as nearly settled as this necessary reference to Fullerton would allow. The circumstances of the morning had led Catherine's feelings through the varieties of suspense, security, and disappointment, but they were now safely lodged in perfect bliss, and with spirits elated to rapture, with Henry at her heart and Northanger Abbey on her lips, she hurried home to write her letter. Mr. and Mrs. Morland, relying on the discretion of the friends whom they had already entrusted their daughter, felt no doubt of the propriety of an acquaintance which had been formed under their eye, and sent therefore, by return of post, their ready consent to her visit in Gloucestershire. This indulgence, though not more than Catherine had hoped for, completed her conviction of being favored beyond every other human creature, in friends and fortune, circumstance and chance. Everything seemed to cooperate for her advantage. But the kindness of her first friends, the Allens, she had been introduced into scenes where pleasure of every kind had met her. Her feelings, her preferences, had each known the happiness of a return. Wherever she felt attachment, she had been able to create it. The affection of Isabella was to be secured to her and his sister. The Tilneys, they by whom, above all, she desired to be favorably thought of, outstripped even her wishes in the flattering measure by which their intimacy would be so continued. Was to be continued. She was to be their chosen visitor. She was to be for weeks under the same roof with the person whose society she mostly prized. And in addition to all the rest, this roof was to be the roof of an abbey. Her passion of ancient edifices was next in degree to her passion for Henry Tilney. The castles and abbeys made usually the charm of those reveries, which is it. Oh, hang on a second. And castles and abbeys made usually the charm of those reveries which his image did not its image did not fill. To see and explore either the ramparts and keep of the one, or the cloisters of the other, had been for many weeks a darling wish, though to be more than the visitor of an hour had seemed too nearly impossible for desire. And yet this was to happen, with all the chances against her of house, hall, place, park, court, and cottage. Northanger turned up an abbey, and she was to be in its inhabitant. Its long, damp passages, its narrow cells and ruined chapel were to be within her daily reach, and she could not entirely subdue the hope of some traditional legends, some awful memorials of an injured and ill-fated man. It was wonderful that her friends should seem so little elated by the possession of such a home, that the consciousness of it should be so meekly borne. The power of early habit only could account for it. A distinction to which they had been born gave no pride. The superiority of abode was no more to them than their superiority of person. Many were the inquiries she was eager to make of Miss Tilney, but so active were her thoughts that when these inquiries were answered, she was hardly more assured than before of Northanger Abbey having been a richly endowed convent at the time of the Reformation, of its having fallen into the hands of an ancestor of the Tilneys on its dissolution, of a large portion of the ancient building still making a part of the present dwelling, although the rest was decayed, or of its standing low in a valley, sheltering from the north and east by rising woods of oak. Chapter 18. With a mind thus full of happiness, Catherine was hardly aware that 2 or 3 days had passed away without her seeing Isabella for more than a few minutes together. She began first to be sensible of this, and to sigh for her conversation as she walked along the pump room one morning by Mrs. Allen's side without anything to say or to hear, and scarcely had she felt a few minutes' longing of friendship before the object of it appeared, and inviting her to a secret conference, led the way to a seat. "This is my favorite place," she said as they sat down on a bench between the doors, which commanded a tolerable view of everybody entering it either. "It is so out of the way." Catherine, observing that Isabella's eyes were continually bent towards one door or the other as an eager expectation, and remembering how often she had been falsely accused of being arch, thought the present a fine opportunity for being really so, and therefore gaily she said, "Do not be uneasy, Isabella. James will soon be here." "Tch, my dear creature," she replied, "do not think me such a simpleton as to be always wanting to confine him to my elbow. It would be hideous to be always together. We should be the jest of the place, and so you are going to Northanger. I'm amazingly glad of it. It is one of the finest old places in England, I understand. I shall depend upon a most particular description of it." "You shall certainly have the best in my power to give. But who are you looking for? Your sister's coming?" "I am not looking for anyone. No one, one's eyes must be somewhere. And you know what a foolish trick I have of fixing mine when my thoughts are 100 miles off. I am amazingly absent. I believe I am the most absent creature in the world. Tilney says it is always the case with minds of a certain stamp. I thought, Isabella, you had something in particular to tell me." "Oh, yes, so I have. But there is a proof of what I was saying. My poor head, I had quite forgotten it. Well, the thing is this. I have just had a letter from John. You can guess the contents." "No, indeed, I cannot." "My sweet love, do not be so abominably affected. What can he write about but yourself? You know he is over head and ears in love with you." "With me, dear Isabella?" "Nay, my sweetest Catherine, this is being quite absurd. Modesty and all that is very well in its way, but really a little common honesty is sometimes quite as becoming. I have no idea of being so overstrained. It is fishing for compliments. His attentions were such as a child must have noticed, and it was but half an hour before he left Bath with you that you gave him the most positive encouragement. He says so in his letter. Says that he as good as made you an offer, and that you received his advances in the kindest way, and now he wants me to urge his suit and say all manner of pretty things to you, so it is in vain to affect ignorance." Catherine, with all the earnestness of truth, expressed her astonishment at being a charge, protesting her innocence of every thought of Mr. Thorpe's being in love with her, and the conquest impossibility of having ever intended to encourage him. "As to any attentions on his side, I do declare upon my honor, I never was sensible of them for a moment, except just as asking me to dance the first day of his coming. And as to making me an offer of anything like that, there must be some unaccountable mistake. I could not have misunderstood a thing of that kind, you know. And as I ever wish to be believed, I solemnly protest that my syllable of such a nature ever passed between us. The last half hour before he went away must be all and completely a mistake, for I did not see him once that whole morning." "But that you certainly did, for you spent the whole morning in Edgar's buildings. It was the day your father's consent came, and I am pretty sure that you and John were alone in the parlors some time before you left the house." "Are you? Well, if you say it is so. I dare say, but for the life of me I cannot recollect it. I do remember now being with you and seeing him as well as the rest. But that we were ever alone for 5 minutes. However, it is not worth arguing about, for whatever might pass on his side, you must be convinced by my having no recollection of it, that I never thought nor expected nor wished for anything of the kind from him. I am excessively concerned that he should have any regard for me, but indeed it has been quite unintentional on my side. I never had the smallest idea of it. Pray undeceive him as soon as you can, and tell him I beg his pardon. That is, I do not know what I ought to say, but make him understand what I mean in the properest way. I would not speak disrespectfully of a brother of yours, Isabel, I am sure, but you know very well that if I could think of one man more than another, he is not the person." Isabella was silent. "My dear friend, you must not be angry with me. I cannot suppose your brother cares so very much about me, and, you know, we shall still be sisters." "Yes, yes," with a blush. "There are more ways than one of our being sisters, but where am I wandering to? Well, my dear Catherine, the case seems to be that you are determined against poor John, is it not so?" "I certainly cannot return his affections, and I certainly never meant to encourage it." "Since that is the case, I am sure I shall not tease you any further. John desired me to speak to you on the subject, and therefore I have, but I confess, as soon as I read his letter, I thought it a very foolish and prudent business, and not likely to promote the good of either, for what were you to live upon, supposing you came together? You have both of you something, to be sure, but it is not a trifle that will support a family nowadays. And after all that romancers may say, there is no doing without money. I only wonder John could think of it. He could not have received my last." "You do acquit me, then, of anything wrong? You are convinced that I never meant to deceive your brother, never suspected him of liking me till this moment?" "Ah, as to that," answered Isabella laughingly, "I do not pretend to determine what your thoughts and designs in time past may have been. All that is best known to yourself. A little harmless flirtation or so will occur, and one is often drawn on to give more encouragement than one wishes to stand by. But you may be assured that I am the last person in the world to judge you severely, and those things should be allowed for in youth and high spirits. What one means one day, you know, one may not mean the next. Circumstances change, opinions alter." "But my opinion of your brother never did alter. It was always the same. You are describing what never happened." "My dearest Catherine," continued the other one, without at all listening to her, "I would not for all the world by the means of hurrying you into an engagement before you knew what you were about. I do not think anything would justify me in wishing you to sacrifice all your happiness merely to oblige my brother, because he is my brother, and who perhaps, after all, you know, might be just as happy without you, for people seldom know what they would be at, young men especially. They are so amazingly changeable and inconstant. What I say is, why should a brother's happiness be dearer to me than a friend's? You know I carry my notions of friendship pretty high. But above all things, my dear Catherine, do not be in a hurry. Take my word for it that if you are in too great a hurry, you will certainly live to repent it. Tilney says there is nothing people are so often deceived in as such the state of their own affections, and I believe he is very right. Ah, here he comes. Never mind, he will not see us, I am sure." Catherine, looking up, perceived Captain Tilney, and Isabella, earnestly fixing her eye on him as she spoke, soon caught his notice. He approached immediately and took the seat to which her movements invited him. His first address made Catherine start, though spoken low. She could distinguish. "What, always to be watched in person or by proxy?" "Huh, nonsense," was Isabella's answer in the same half-whisper. "Why do you put such things into my head? If I could believe it, my spirits, you know, is pretty independent. Hey, Tornado, good to see you. Hope your day's been going well. I have a chapter end coming up in the next page, so I'll chat a little bit then." "I wish your heart were independent. That would be enough for me." "My heart, indeed. What can you have to do with hearts? You men have none of you any hearts." "If we have not hearts, we have eyes, and they give us torment enough." "Do they? I am sorry for it. I am sorry they find anything so disagreeable in me. I will look another way. I hope this pleases you." Turning her back on him. "I hope your eyes are not tormented now." "Never more so. for the edge of a blooming cheek is still in view, once too much and too little. Catherine heard all this, and quite out of countenance, could listen no longer. Amazed that Isabella could endure it, and jealous for her brother, she rose up, and saying she should join Mrs. Allen, proposed their walking. But for this Isabella showed no inclination. She was so amazingly tired, and it was so odious to parade around the pump room, and if she moved from her seat, she should miss her sisters. She was expecting her sisters every moment, so that her dearest Catherine must excuse her, and must sit quietly down again. But Catherine could be stubborn too, and Mrs. Allen, just then coming up to propose their returning home, she joined her and walked out of the pump room, leaving Isabella still sitting with Captain Tilney. With much uneasiness did she thus leave them. It seemed to her that Captain Tilney was falling in love with Isabella, and Isabella unconsciously encouraging him. Unconsciously it must be, for Isabella's attachment to James was as certain and well acknowledged as her engagement. To doubt her truth or good intentions was impossible, and yet, during the whole of their conversation, her manner had been odd. She wished Isabella had talked more like her usual self, and not so much about money, and had not looked so well pleased at the sight of Captain Tilney. How strange that she should not perceive this admiration. Catherine longed to give her a hint of it, to put her on her guard, and prevent all the pain which her too lively behavior might otherwise create both for him and her brother. The compliment of John Thorpe's affection did not make amends for his thoughtfulness in his sister. She was almost as far from believing as from wishing it to be sincere, for she had not forgotten that he could mistake, and his assertion of the offer and of his encouragement convinced her that his mistakes could sometimes be very egregious. In vanity, therefore, she gained but little. Her chief profit was in wonder that he should think it worth his while to fancy himself in love with her. For a matter of lively astonishment, Isabella talked of his intention. She had never been sensible of any, but Isabella had said many things which she hoped had been spoken in haste, and would never be said again, and upon this she was glad to rest altogether for present ease and comfort. Penguin! So good to see you. How are you and how's your girlfriend? I hope she's doing better. I can chat a little bit. We're at a chapter break. How's the winter been treating you? Have you been getting a lot of snow up there? Sorry, I was just checking on a thing. Oh, okay. Yeah, we've had some warmer days. It's finally cooling down here. And we might actually get a little bit of snow this week. We'll see. Apparently there was a little bit of snow on Friday morning, although I didn't see it. But one of my coworkers couldn't come into work that day because she lives way out on this really crazy road. And hello, tornado. Ooh, you've had a lot of snow? Nice. I'm kind of jealous, actually. It's been way too warm here, way too dry, but hopefully it'll be coming. We have our wet season and our cold season, like February and March. We still don't get enough precipitation, though. Oh, it's good that it's melting away, Penguin. Yeah, we're actually where we live really depends on the snowpack in the mountains, because that'll keep the water running throughout the summer. but I think they may have had like a little bit of snow this season so far. I'm kind of glad that I don't watch the news because it will be nothing but, oh, we need more precipitation. It's going to be so dry. There's going to be another drought. I basically lived in droughts my whole life. So sad. Yeah, I'm very glad to see you both. I am going to continue with the story, though. Probably do like 1 or 2 more chapters. We shall see. So, we'll hide Maestro. We will continue. Chapter 19. A few days passed away, and Catherine, though not allowing herself to suggest her friend, could not help watching her closely. The result of her observation was not agreeable. Isabella seemed an altered creature. When she saw her, indeed, surrounded only by her immediate friends in Edgar's Building or Pulteney Street, her change of manners was so trifling that I'll backtrack when I start back up. The story recommendations, they're really tricky because I would love to have story recommendations. However, they have to be public domain. So, they have to be at least 100 years old so that the copyright has expired and people can do what they may with it. And so that, that's why sometimes we stumble upon some language which is not appropriate anymore, or, references or descriptions that are very dated. And, I try to adjust it so that, so that it's a safe thing to read. Otherwise, I would love to. If you have, actually, I'm about to put up a poll because February is going to bring the return of the all ages story time, and so I'm going to, of course, be doing the older ages story time as usual, 2 story times a week. But I'm going to do a third where it's going to be like 10 and up viewership, and it's okay for younger audiences. And so I'll need to put up a poll for which you guys would like me to read. I have, let's see, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, Secret Garden, I think Wind in the Willows is one, and probably Peter Pan. Yeah. I actually, if you wanted to recommend something for me to read myself, I'm totally up for that. I know that there's one that I've been waiting to come in because it's been back ordered. The publisher, basically that means that the distributor where we get the books from at the store where I work, they're waiting for the publisher to print more copies and send them more copies to the warehouse so they can send them out. And I think it's called The House at the End of the Lane. It's Neil Gaiman, and it sounds really interesting. And that's one that, goodness, why am I blanking on his name? I'm so sorry. He's my other mod. He used to have a different name, and then he changed it. But I think it was Lucky Denver used to be his name, and now it is something else. Wholesome Chaotic, that's right. Wholesome. So Wholesome recommended that one to me. And it will be coming in soon. But yeah, if you have any suggestions, if you wanted, actually, are you on the Discord? I don't remember if you're on the Discord. I'll give you the link. So we could actually have a book recommendation section. We do have a Book Nook section in there where, you can post up, hey, I read this great story, or, has anybody else read this story, want to talk about it, that sort of thing. Oh, okay. Wonderful. I wasn't sure. I know that Kick and Corral and Penguin are all on there. All right. Yeah, the thing with the public domain, you can get cited for copyright infringement, like the same way if you showed, sorry, like clips from a movie and, or did a play without getting the rights to do the play, but you can't have like the recording of it. And since I put up all of my story times on YouTube, I have to be careful of that. But working at a bookstore, I can find a lot of material to work with. And in fact, I've been having way too much fun with it. I went into another one of my Dover, Bantam, and Signet searches that had me ordering about 6 new books. I'm not obsessed, I swear. All right, let's continue. Hang on. There we go. Chapter 16. A few days passed away, and Catherine, though not allowing herself to suspect her friend, could not help watching her closely. The result of her observations was not agreeable. Isabella seemed an altered creature. Where she saw her, indeed, surrounded only by her immediate friends in Edgar's Buildings or Pulteney Street, her change of manners was so trifling that, had it gone no further, it might have passed unnoticed. Something of a languid indifference, or of that boasted presence of absence of mind, which Catherine had never heard of before, would occasionally come across her, but had nothing worse appeared. That might only have spread a new grace and inspired a warmer interest. But when Catherine saw her in public, admitting Captain Tilney's attentions as readily as they were offered, and allowing him almost an equal share with James in her notice and smiles, the alteration became too positive to be passed over. What could be meant by such unsteady conduct, what her friend could be at, was beyond her comprehension. Isabella could not be aware of the pain she was inflicting, but it was a degree of wilful thoughtfulness which Catherine could not but resent. James was the sufferer. She saw him grave and uneasy, and moreover, and however careless of her present comfort the woman might be who had given him her heart, to her he was always an object. For poor Captain Tilney, too, she was greatly concerned, though his looks did not please her. His name was a passport to her goodwill, and she thought with sincere compassion of his approaching disappointment. For, in spite of what she had believed herself to overhear in the pump-room, his behavior was so incompatible with a knowledge of Isabella's engagement that she could not, upon reflection, imagine him aware of it. He might be jealous of her brother as a rival, but if more had seemed implied, the fault must have been in her misapprehension. She wished, by a gentle remonstrance, to remind Isabella of her situation, and make her aware of this double unkindness, but for remonstrance, neither opportunity or comprehension was always against her. Hang on a second. I thought for sure I was going to sneeze, and then I didn't. That's frustrating. If able to suggest a hint, Isabella could never understand it. In this distress, the intended departure of the Tilney family became her chief consolation. Their journey into Gloucestershire was to take place within a few days, and Captain Tilney's removal would at least restore peace to every heart but his own. But Captain Tilney had at present no intention of removing. He was not to be of the party to Northanger. He was to continue at Bath. When Catherine knew this, her resolution was directly made. She spoke to Henry Tilney on the subject, regretting his brother's evident partiality for Miss Thorpe, and entreating him to make known her prior engagement. "My brother does know it," was Henry's answer. "Does he? Then why does he stay here?" He made no reply, and was beginning to talk of something else, but she eagerly continued. Why do you persuade him to go away? Why do not you persuade him to go away? The longer he stays, the worse it will be for him at last. Pray advise him for his own sake and for everybody's sake to leave Bath directly. Absence will in time make him comfortable again. But he can have no hope here, and it is only staying to be miserable." Henry smiled and said, "I'm sure my brother would not wish to do that." "Then you will persuade him to go away?" "Persuasion is not a command, but pardon me if I cannot even endeavor to persuade him. I have myself told him that Miss Thorpe is engaged. He knows what he is about and must be his own master." "No, he does not know what he is about," cried Catherine. "He does not know the pain he is giving my brother. Not that James has ever told me so, but I am sure he is very uncomfortable." "And are you sure it is my brother's doing?" "Yes, very sure." "Is it my brother's attentions to Miss Thorpe or Miss Thorpe's admission of them that gives the pain?" "Is it not the same thing?" "I think Mr. Morland would acknowledge a difference. No man is offended by another man's admiration of the woman he loves. It is the woman only who can make it a torment." Catherine blushed for her friend and said, "Isabella's wrong, but I am sure she cannot mean to torment, for she is very much attached to my brother. She has been in love with him ever since they first met, and while my father's consent was uncertain, she fretted herself almost into a fever. You know she must be attached to him." "I understand. She is in love with James and flirts with Frederick." "Oh, no, not flirts. A woman in love with one man cannot flirt with another." "It is probable that she will neither love so well nor flirt so well as she might do either singly. The gentlemen must each give up a little. After a short pause, Catherine resumed with, "Then you do not believe Isabella so very much attached to my brother?" "I can have no opinion on that subject." "But what can your brother mean? If he knows her engagement, what can he mean by his behavior?" You are a very close questioner." "Am I? I only ask what I want to be told." "But do you only ask what I can be expected to tell?" "Yes, I think so. For you must know your brother's heart." "My brother's heart, as you term it, on the present occasion, I assure you I can only guess at." "Well?" "Well. Nay, if it is to be guesswork, let us all guess for ourselves. To be guided by second-hand conjecture is pitiful. The premises are before you. My brother is a lively and perhaps sometimes a thoughtless young man. He has had about a week's acquaintance with your friend, and he has known her engagement almost as long as he has known her." "Well," said Catherine, after some moments' consideration, "you may be able to guess at your brother's intentions from all this, but I'm sure I cannot. But is not your father uncomfortable about it? Does not he want Captain Tilney to go away? Sure, if your father were to speak to him, he would go." "My dear Miss Morland," said Henry, "in this amiable solicitude for your brother's comfort, may you not be a little mistaken? Are you not carried a little too far? Would he thank you, either on his own account or Miss Thorpe's, for supposing that her affection, or at least her good behavior, is only to be secured by her seeing nothing of Captain Tilney? Is he safe only in solitude? Or is her heart constant to him only when unsolicited by anyone else? He cannot think this, and you may be sure that he would not have you think it. I will not say, do not be uneasy, because I know that you are so at this moment, but be as little uneasy as you can. You have no doubt of the mutual attachment of your brother and your friend. Depend on it, therefore, that real jealousy never can exist between them. Depend on it that no disagreement between them can be of any duration. Their hearts are open to each other, as neither heart can be to you. They know exactly what is required and what can be borne. and you may be certain that one will never tease the other beyond what is known to be pleasant. Perceiving her still to look doubtful and grave, he added, "Though Frederick does not leave Bath with us, he will probably remain but a very short time, perhaps only a few days behind us. His leave of absence will soon expire, and he must return to his regiment. And that will be what will then be their acquaintance. The mess room will drink Isabella Thorpe for a fortnight, and she will laugh with your brother over poor Tilney's passion for a month." Catherine would contend no longer against comfort. She had resisted its approaches beyond the full length of a speech, but it now carried her captive. Henry Tilney must know best. She blamed herself for the extent of her fears, and resolved never to think so seriously on the subject again. Her resolution was supported by Isabella's behavior in their parting interview. The Thorpes spent the last evening of Catherine's stay in Pulteney Street, and nothing passed between the lovers to excite their uneasiness, or make her quit them in apprehension. James was in excellent spirits, and Isabella most engagingly placid. Her tenderness for her friend seemed rather the first feeling of her heart, but that at such a moment was allowable, and once she gave her lover a flat contradiction, and once she drew back her hand. But Catherine remembered Henry's instructions, and placed it all to judicious affection. The embraces, tears, and promises of the parting fair ones may be fancied. All right, so that brings us to the end of story time. And now it is time to raid. I wish that I could do a game stream, but Sunday usually has a whole bunch of chores to do, so I have quite a bit of things to do. Does anybody have any suggestions or requests for who to raid? Let's see. Hang on just a second. I'm going to see who's on right now. Here we go. I know, I'm sorry, Penguin. I do, of course, have all of them up. I know you were just here for the last half hour. Let's see, Alpha Bucket is streaming RuneScape. We rated him last time, though. Let's see. Makers and Crafting. I am not familiar with that one. So Shiny Wave is doing decorating flower pots, swatching new markers, and then there's something else. And then It's Twiggy is doing Minecraft. And let's see if there anybody in the recommended. There's Mother Moon doing Animal Crossing. Hurricane Nicole doing Animal Crossing. Taking a look. See, Cozy Sunday Decorating. And Sunday Fun Day on Wednesday. Okay. I am going to say, let us rate somebody new. Mother Moon or Hurricane Nicole? Let's do Mother Moon, because we're doing Cozy Sunday vibes. All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for hanging out with me and staying to listen. Let's see. Mother Moon. So we're going to continue with, we are rating. We're going to continue with Northanger Abbey on Thursday, I think it is. And then I'll do a game stream after that, of course. Hang on. Yes, sorry, I'm a little distracted here. Getting my story raid message ready to go. Oops, nope, that was not what I wanted. Copy. All right. So I'll see you guys next time. I hope you have a good week. And, nice relaxing time. Bye. Yeah.
Hello? Oh, Storytime Sunny, welcome in. We're just about to raid